Perfect. So tonight's session from Green Burial Council is Ask a Funeral Director, arranging a green funeral at any funeral home. We're going to talk a little about funeral homes, cemeteries, common FAQs around making arrangements for these wishes, and a little bit about the role of the Green Burial Council. We are a nonprofit organization with a mission of improving the sustainability of death and dying and educating the public about these issues and options. So your donation would help us grow our mission if you find something useful in the session tonight. So the Green Burial Council, I'll just briefly introduce our role. We offer a voluntary seal of approval, a credential for natural burial cemeteries, funeral homes, and products that are suitable for natural burial. And we also have a mission to educate the public and the funeral industry to increase the availability of these more eco-friendly options. And we're going to talk more about why they're eco-friendly and how we can increase the availability specifically in your areas. I just want to make sure I didn't miss a slide. Nope, perfect. My co-host tonight is Don Hearth. Don, will you introduce yourself?
I sure will. My name is Dawn. I've been in the marketing and advertising business for quite a while, and I came to this experience through, I was just reading, I happened to read about green burial and was immediately intrigued and wanted to know more about how I could make it happen and how to experience that. So I started learning a little bit more, found out about the Green Burial Council, and then got involved as a volunteer and then as a board member, which kind of led to the experience that we're going to talk a little bit about tonight.
Right. Yeah. Mine is a little different. My background is I'm a licensed funeral director and embalmer. I first found out about natural burial when I was in mortuary college studying all of the options to become, to enter the conventional cemetery and funeral industry. I had an immediate response to the idea of a final resting place in nature. It seems so substantially different to me than the conventional cemeteries I was working in as someone new to the death and dying industry. So as a student, I kept this soft spot in my heart for natural burial as sort of like, we'll learn about all the options, but this one's going to be my favorite. And so I was working as a funeral home manager much later when a family finally asked me for this type of burial here in Colorado. I was so excited to meet and help these folks. And then I was immediately disappointed by what their options were for natural burial sites here in Colorado. So I founded the first environmental burial preserve here in Colorado. And we'll look at some pictures from there. So this is the only cemetery in the state with an ecological restoration mission. And I joined the Green Burial Council because I came from this world of being in funeral homes as a licensed funeral director. I really wanted to be in the conversation about how those funeral homes are going to turn around and respond to this growing need and wish in the community of folks who are planning their own environmentally friendly funerals. What to expect tonight? I'm going to talk about a few different interpretations of what could be green about a funeral. We'll define natural burial or green burial, but also talk about some other measures that could make your end-of-life arrangements more sustainable. We're going to specifically focus on questions to ask at the funeral home. We'll also offer you an opportunity to pick our brains about this process at the end. Specifically, we want to talk about finding a final resting place around natural burial. This is one of the key issues. Relatedly, what to do if there are no GBC certified cemeteries in your area. We'll talk about what that means and what to do if you do or you don't have them. So just briefly, I will define green burial. I also call this natural burial. I say natural burial when I mean the disposition. Disposition is a funeral industry word for saying what we're going to do with the body. So when someone is naturally buried, that means there's no embalming, nothing that's going to prevent the natural processes where the body's going to break down and be returned to the earth. So that would include the wrappings on the outside. If there's a shroud or a casket, it must be of biodegradable materials. And there would be no vault or outer burial container, nothing that would inhibit that body's process of being returned to the earth. When I say green burial, I'm usually referring more to the movement, the marketing concepts, Don, like you read about and were intrigued by, what we're doing here tonight, spreading the word. Greening burial is a project and a cultural shift, but natural burials are as old as time. If you go across history and geography around the world, almost everyone would have been buried in a natural way up until industrialization, when modern embalming was invented, and an industry cropped up around caskets and vaults and all related funeral services. Okay, so hybrid versus natural versus conservation burial grounds. That's a lot of syllables to say this. You can be naturally buried in almost any type of cemetery if they allow it. A hybrid cemetery is going to also have a conventional burial, vaulted burial, embalmed burial, and a natural or conservation burial ground would be someplace that's dedicated to having a lighter touch, having a maintenance plan that does no harm to the ecosystem, or in fact restores and repairs the ecosystem. Depending on which one of these type of burial grounds we're discussing, the memorialization, that's a lot of syllables. That means if you have a headstone. Some natural burials, cemeteries will allow a headstone or some other type of marker. Others are going to have a more limited policy on that. Same thing about how the final resting place is going to be managed. Some firms might allow a natural burial, but they still mow the lawn and maintain sod grass. Other places, like I described, might have native species restoration. And then around your funeral choices, you can have a natural burial and still have virtually any type of funeral within reason and with certain key caveats. Doesn't it doesn't mean you can or you can't have a service in a place of worship, service in the funeral home, service at your house. Guess we wouldn't even really call it a service at that point. Home vigil, wake, all these types of options are going to be widely available, especially if we know the right questions to ask. So most of you on the call tonight are still living, so we'll focus mostly on pre-planning someone's green burial. But of course, all of these same questions are going to apply if we've just had a death and have found ourselves across the table from a funeral director. I guess the only one that wouldn't apply if we've had a death is this decision to pre-plan. Don, I know you mentioned you read about natural burial. Can you tell us a little about what it meant to you, how you introduced it to your mom, and what made you to decide to pre-plan?
Well, it's interesting. I think as I started learning about green burial and I was talking to her about it, she became more interested, as I told her more about it. I think initially when you say green burial to people, they're sort of like, what is that? But, as you look at pictures and they see the experience and they see what a beautiful experience it can be, I think most people warm up to the idea. And what's interesting is I think we probably would not have ever had a pre-planning conversation had it not been for the conversation about green burial, because then I think that sort of facilitates a lot more conversation around, okay, well, if I do want those things, I probably need to pre-plan that, because that's not going to happen, just by chance if I die and don't have any of that in place. So that was a really good thing that came out of that, is I think that started the process of, I really need to pre-plan for this. So I feel like I was real glad that that happened, even though we kind of got sidetracked on some of the things that happened after we had that conversation. But I think at least that got the ball rolling.
Yeah. That's sort of this is paraphrasing you. The more unique our final wishes are, the more important it is to sort of do our research and discuss and document what the wishes are. Not that, as I said, natural burial is as old as time. It's ubiquitous around the world, or it was. But now in today's society, we find ourselves with limited options, or depending on where you are. And so if there's going to be some more research that needs to be done, or we have fewer options, so we need to be more specific about which of those are going to suit our needs. I think that this conversation about pre-planning is vitally important. Of course, it also helps with the financial considerations. In most cases, not only can you state your wishes with pre-planning, but you also would have the option to go ahead and pay for those arrangements ahead of time. Doing it ahead of time is when you're going to have the most flexibility about what the payment options are, if it can be in installments, that kind of thing. And it also locks in the prices of the day you sign those documents. If you are pre-planning and you are young and in good health, it's perfect to go ahead and sign and pay, because the price will never go down under market conditions, and there's a lot of good arguments to having pre-planning. I have found that a common problem that we have in cemetery and funeral arrangements is most people are not fully aware that we need to have both, and that it might be separate. From the cemetery side, I feel this one way, but Dawn, you had this experience, you and your mom.
Yeah, we definitely did. And I think I'm here to tell you I asked all the dumb questions when we had our experience. So please don't think there's any dumb questions, because we walked in with just a completely different picture, I think, of what we thought it was going to go, how we thought it was going to go versus, what we actually learned. And that's okay too. But yes, that was one of the biggest things is once we started thinking, okay, let's pre-plan, what do we want to do? You just naturally, one of the first steps is you look for what's available in your area. So we found a place that said it offered green burial. So in our minds, we're walking and we're going to drive to this place. We'll talk to the people about the funeral, and then we will see this beautiful, vast green burial cemetery. And that was not what happened. We went to a traditional funeral home who we later learned then coordinates with a cemetery. So that was one of the first things we learned, was that that is not a two-in-one package. So being aware of that going in and knowing exactly, that starts the conversation of where actually will I be buried and what does that look like and how does that work with what you're offering here. So that was one of the biggest things.
Yeah, we have a big disconnect in the funeral and cemetery industry between the way we see ourselves and the way the public understands us, even just this way I phrase it. Oh, funeral and cemetery. We consider ourselves two completely different things for what credentials you have and what laws you have to follow. But to most people who are facing a death, we really just have end of life needs. And it's not necessarily clear at the outset. Like as I work at the cemetery, people come to me to discuss the final resting place, and we get all through the tour and picking out a spot, and they say, I just have one question, how does the body even get here on the day of the burial? And I realize that there's this huge knowledge gap in that, legally speaking, the funeral home and the funeral director are, under most state laws, that's who can provide and sell funeral service, which is going to explicitly include care for the body, transportation, and filing the death certificate, and of course, maintaining them under refrigeration. These are the most important parts of it. And then the cemetery side is going to be strictly about the final resting place, the spot itself, the conditions on the day of the burial, the digging, etc., and then the aftercare of that spot, your future visits, your the restoration plan or the lawn mowing, whatever it happens to be at that cemetery. There are cemeteries with funeral homes affiliated with them where you can have sort of a one-stop shop. But even at those firms, you are likely to talk with two representatives at the same time, or one after another, because one is sort of wearing their funeral hat and the other is wearing their cemetery hat. So when we do think of the financial considerations on a natural burial, it's important to keep in mind we might end up with expenses on two different companies, one for the final resting place and one for all the services you might need for help around that death. Okay, and we'll just start with the funeral home for a little of more information. GBC certifications for funeral homes. So you can go to our website, it's greenburialcouncil.org. And on the menu, you go to find a provider and then the interactive maps. And you can find the funeral homes who have opted in to the seal of approval from the Green Burial Council. What those folks have pledged to is that they have policies that are friendly to natural burial, specifically around their embalming policy, meaning they're not going to have a policy that is going to force and shoehorn you into an embalming just because you're asking for more than the minimum. They're also required to have at least 3 suitable containers. The container would be the casket or the shroud, ones that are suitable for natural burial so that you have a choice. The GBC seal for funeral homes is meant to signal to you all, to the consumer, hey, this funeral home is pledged to be friendly to these practices. I want you to know that every funeral home is required to maintain a general price list, and they're required to give one to you when you start to discuss what their funeral options are and what they might cost. But you have to be careful as green burial aware shoppers, which you now all will be after tonight. Everybody's GPL, general price list, has the same few phrases emblazoned on there because it's federally required, that the FTC tells us what we have to have on the GPL. And including that is an embalming statement, which is a little misleading. Because you're seeking green burial that embalming is not required. And because you're at a GBC certified funeral home that they're also not going to require embalming just because you want to spend some time with your loved one. But this GPL is going to have this phrase that says, embalming is not required by law. If you want an arrangement without embalming, you can choose something like an arrangement without a viewing. And it implies that the inverse is true, that if you want to view the person, embalming must be required. In fact, that's almost never true. It's almost never required by law. The FTC phrased it that way to give funeral homes the discretion to make their own requirements, meaning some funeral homes will require embalming if you tell them, yeah, we want to participate with the shrouding, or yeah, we need to have their face showing when the priest is here. But it's not a health department reason and it's not a state law reason. It's a matter of private business. So what you're looking for in a funeral home is their openness to a disposition without embalming, but don't be discouraged if they have this FTC required statement under their embalming offering, because it only just implies it in the inverse. It's not really true. What you're looking for instead, especially if it is a GBC certified funeral home, is they're going to have somewhere else on that price list information about what they do when there's no embalming. So this might be a package that says our natural burial package includes, body care that doesn't have embalming. It's non-invasive. There's also the option to have formaldehyde-free green embalming. The GBC certified funeral home is allowed to require they're allowed to require that to have those sort of more sensitive activities, we do the green embalming. We'll talk about this a little more in a couple of slides. I personally think It's greener to do nothing than to do the green embalming. But there's reasons you might want to have embalming, and we'll talk about those a little bit as well. One common FAQ I get about green burial is people are concerned when they call the cemetery, doesn't this mean we have to have burial within 24 hours or within 48 hours? And there can be some differences in local regulations on this, but in general, the funeral home is going to provide us with mortuary refrigeration. They're going to give us cold storage. That means it's not as tight of a time sensitive schedule as it might be if you were really just trying to beat the clock on the condition of the deceased person.
Well,
So
and I know that was the question. That was a question we had, is what happens if you die away from home? So that might be a question people have a lot too, even if you're not in the area at all.
totally, very common question. With mortuary refrigeration, we can almost always, 99.9% of the time, get it done without embalming. A lot of funeral homes are going to be natively inclined to suggest embalming. So to answer your question, Don, what happens if you die away from home is in most cases, we're going to have to involve a funeral home in the jurisdiction where the death occurred. And we're now working with, the ones you thought you were going to be working with and the ones in the town where the death occurred, because we're going to need a local death certificate, and we're going to need local care for the body to prepare them for shipment to the final resting place. But even in cases of, it's an airplane ride and it's a natural burial, we can still do it with dry ice, with Techni ice. That's like a cooling pad, a sort of reusable type of ice pack. This happens all the time around the world because, of course, Jewish people are repatriated to be buried in Israel all the time. And the Jewish custom is to have no embalming. So there are definitely funeral homes that might give you guff about it. And that would be a great reason to start at the GBC website to find ones that have sort of already signaled we're open to this. But it's almost always possible. And as I've been implying, it's also almost always possible to have, as I said, we can have family participate in washing or shrouding the person. We can have indoor memorial activities like a viewing or a chapel service or a church service. It's going to be possible to take your loved one home for some amount of time or leave them home until it's time for the burial, especially if we have a game funeral home kind of participating and supporting those acts. So just because it's a natural burial doesn't mean we're limited to just being whisked straight out to the burial ground. We can still have sort of as much or as little funeral activity as we want to. And I should say also, anymore, it seems like people are frequently having an intimate little thing by the graveside right away and then scheduling something indoor with air conditioning and catering with sort of the wider group of family and friends. So it's very possible to blend all of these elements together when we arrange a green funeral. But what makes them eco-friendly? We have all these choices, and we have all of these considerations, definitions of green. What I defined at the beginning was really what happens to the body. It's a green burial if the person's not embalmed and everything is goes back to the earth in the natural way. But even if we take that sort of narrow orthodox view of what it means to be naturally buried, there's always judgment calls on, well, do we pick a shroud or a wood casket? Well, if it's cotton, it might have a high water usage of clean water in the processing and weaving and all of this. And if it's wood, it might contribute to a deforestation, or it might be could it be reclaimed wood and could it be locally sourced? Then it sorts to be, so we always have to make these value judgments on what we're asking for. And I know with me, my attraction to green burial was like, wow, I want the final resting place to be in nature, where other people might be more concerned about their overall carbon footprint and how it might affect climate change, how it does affect climate change, how their own decisions would affect them. The Green Burial Council also points out that a decline in bombing protects the workers' health of no longer being exposed to formaldehyde. And as we're going to see, there's a sort of a degree in how much good we can do with our land usage too. So all of these different decisions mean the family who is also facing this prospect of losing a loved one, we have to also define our values on what makes the funeral eco-friendly, and sort of rank them on if we do have to choose between a hybrid cemetery that's in our zip code or a natural burial ground that's a few hours away. These are not easy calls. So the next two slides, I'm going to just walk through some of the factors that are going to affect the overall greenness, shade of green, eco-friendliness of our funeral choices. And I would like to add, we have in many states now, and a growing number of states, alkaline hydrolysis, which is known as like a green cremation or water cremation. It has less of a emissions impact of burning up the fuel for flame cremation. And we also have natural organic reduction or body composting, which is a different type of green disposition. It still breaks the body up and reduces it down to a new product the way a cremation does. But because the chemical reactions of a composting is taking place, it does sequester carbon out of the air. The downside of natural organic reduction body composting is, again, takes a heavy toll on our water usage. Alfalfa is necessary to start that process, and virgin alfalfa comes from our industrial agricultural industry at a high cost in water usage. So that's why I asked this question. Does the body remain intact or must it be reduced in an industrial facility? I would argue that a natural burial where the body remains intact and the only processes that take place are the ones from nature. This is the body's naturally occurring bacteria and the microbes that are already present in the soil. They do everything that's needed to return the body back to the earth. For me, that would be always greener in terms of the footprint than any type of cremation or reduction, because those take place in a facility. There's always going to be, carbon emissions overhead on the utilities for having a process at all. Similarly, we have the question of whether or not to embalm. As I've been hinting, there are always going to be personal or situational reasons for embalming. This is going to improve the sanitary and aesthetic appearance of the person who's died, and it's going to slow the process of decomposition. And so if it's really important to us how they look on that final viewing, or if there's been trauma and people didn't get to see them and we want to have some of those more advanced restoration techniques, you could have embalming and still have a lot of other parts of your funeral be green. There's also GBC certified embalming fluid. It's formaldehyde free and safe for worker health. So that can be sort of a middle ground when we want some of those benefits of embalming, but we want to still be allowed to be buried in a natural burial ground. The environmental toll of embalming is the plastic and water waste, meaning the bottles the bottles of embalming chemicals are shipped around the country. The water runs throughout the entire embalming process. The formaldehyde is a health risk to workers. We also have the carbon footprint of manufacturing and shipping all that stuff, the formaldehyde-laden chemicals. The other thing about embalming is that it would be intentionally inhibiting that microbial action that I described that would return the body to the soil. If you really want ashes to ashes, dust to dust, embalming would be something that kind of takes a step away from that process and slows it to a significant degree. Just a few more choices here we have to make. And by the way, this is also why I said it's good to do pre-planning. You know, are we getting decision fatigue yet? But we'll be asked to choose a casket, container, or shroud. As I said, this is a judgment call as well. Sustainably sourced is good, reused, locally sourced. Local is going to reduce the carbon footprint of transporting the thing, but a renewable material, this would be something fast growing like bamboo or seagrass. Those crops sequester carbon when they grow, and they grow all the time. So you might make a trade-off and choose a renewable material, even though it has to be shipped over a longer distance. There's all sorts of reasons you might uh, uh, people might feel differently for different reasons on this topic. I also want to mention the Fair Trade Seal of Approval and the Green Burial Council Seal of Approval. Those are both outside third parties that look at the practices of where things are sourced and manufactured that can help us guide some of these decisions. A Green Burial Council certified casket or container or urn, what we're certifying is that it is made from non-toxic, non-harmful, biodegradable materials, and that they designed it with the minimum of unnecessary glues or hardware or a different anything that would inhibit, again, that process of return to the soil. So all of the decisions we've made above are things that need to be created and shipped. The funeral home and cemetery have their own overhead too. We all have a power bill and you know, our vehicle choices and any of that. So there may be funeral homes or cemeteries that are doing more or less to try and reckon with the sustainability of their choices. And specifically with natural burial, we need to look at the land use around the cemetery. We can be the most sustainable and eco-friendly with our burial choices when we also use the space for conservation purposes, meaning we're not wasting resources on lawn mowing. We have management in place that protects native species. If we're planting native species, we're attracting pollinators and providing habitat. And native habitat, forests, grasslands, etc. These are one of, you know, I say we, I mean all of humanity. This is one of our most powerful ways of sequestering carbon, is just protecting those native spaces and letting the natural ecosystems do their thing and regenerate every year. It's an important way to sequester carbon now and into the future. So we have an opportunity with natural burial to give a gift that keeps on giving with our burial choices, separate from just what's happening around the time of the death. So as I said, we're going to have to make choices around the cemetery needs as well. And Don, I know your family had numerous questions in this area. Can you sort of tell me what your starting point was?
Yeah, a lot of it was around, I think we sort of compare what we know about traditional funeral to, okay, how's it going to be different if we choose green burial? And so I think, some of the questions my mom first had, what about a headstone? And is there any going to be any sort of identification or marker where I'm buried and what's allowed there? And then, what kind of service will we be able to have as a family? Will that be the traditional? Will anyone be able to be there at the burial? How involved can the family be? And then the container, was a big one too. Like, what will I actually be buried in? Those were some of the biggest things. And then picking out the plot, because I had read different things that sometimes, yes, you can pick out a plot. Other places, there's no way to pick that area, so you just sort of buy into the idea that, okay, I'm agreeing to this, and however that looks at the time of death is what that will be. So those were some of the things that we wanted to discuss when we went in.
Yeah, those are the big ones. There's
Hmm.
so many questions around these topics. It's kind of mind-boggling to think, wow, can you imagine, being asked all of these or having to ask all of these on the day that you're also grappling with the death of a loved one. So the
Well,
GBC.
and just to finish that thought, that all sort of shifted once we realized that what they were providing was a burial in a more traditional cemetery. So all of those questions sort of shifted. So that's another thing to kind of consider as you're thinking through those questions is what type of cemetery will you be buried in? Is it a hybrid? Is it, are they burying you green within a traditional cemetery? Because then everything changes. So
Yeah,
that was
yeah,
what we learned.
yeah. There's a lot of variance cemetery to cemetery, and we've helped with that with our GBC seal of approval for cemeteries, but there's still a lot of topics to cover. So we have 3 levels of certified cemetery. I mentioned a hybrid cemetery is any cemetery that allows natural burial, and this will usually feel like a conventional cemetery, meaning you'll see the headstones in tight rows. They mow the lawn. There might be, concrete used to install the monuments and all of this type of thing. But they have policies in place in either a separate section or in their regular burial sections that they would allow a no vault, no embalming natural burial. And as I said, to me, that meets my definition of natural burial. The loved one went back to the soil. But the fact that they're not using the space now for native species management, that it feels like a regular cemetery, that's a substantial difference aesthetically to how it feels to interact with the space. So our other 2 levels of certification are a natural burial ground, which only has this type of burial, and it pledges to have operational measures, techniques, management that do no harm to the environment there. So our natural burial grounds and our conservation burial grounds will both be surveyed by an ecologist to give us a baseline of what the ecological conditions are on the site so that we can be managing it appropriately for nature. So whether you have access to one of those sites or sort of need to find more of a hybrid option is a really important question to start on. I have a slide here coming up about what do we do if we have none, because this is a movement and we are working to increase accessibility. And a great option for that are going to be locally. You may have religious, municipal, or historical cemeteries. Historical cemeteries, of course, before embalming and industrialization, all burials were natural burials. So they may find that they were always doing them. And so they have no policies against them. And then religious or city cemeteries are uniquely responsive to their constituents. So that might be a good option to get some of the rules changed and to find we can allow a hybrid natural burial after all. And it's important to let our local places know that you attended this webinar tonight, that you're thinking about this for your own family and self, because if they don't hear from the community that there's a demand for this, well, they have no incentive to loosen their rules. Um, okay, so you don't have to be buried at a GBC certified cemetery to have it be a natural burial. A lot of things or measures can make the burial more or less green. And what really matters are the requirements at the cemetery we're talking about. For example, they may allow or disallow those eco-friendly embalming chemicals. They may require a casket and not allow a shroud. Both of those requirements would not be GBC certified cemeteries saying that. But certainly you could still have a green burial with some of these requirements in place. Same thing with the memorialization or marker. Different cemeteries are going to be all over the map on what their policies are. Most natural cemeteries are going to have something that's unobtrusive, if they have anything at all. Whereas if you end up at a hybrid, you might find that you can have a natural burial and still a grand marker. And if that's what's important to your family, you can make your carbon offsets a different place. And as Don shared, there's a million questions around how the space functions. Where do the people go? Is it safe to walk through the burial grounds? What happens to the space? What plants can we bring and plant? I would encourage you all to open a dialogue with your final resting place as soon as possible. Again, because of the benefits of pre-planning, and also because there's not laws that say we have to use a vault or a person has to be embalmed and inside a casket. This is only just that our industry has grown up with these policies and frankly with profiting off of those policies. So they need to hear from us that there is a demand to do things a greener way, to do it more sustainably, and to sort of honor the ancient practice of returning the body back to the earth. Already mentioned most of these measures, how to advocate if you don't have natural burial options or cemetery or funeral home in your area. Tell them you want that. I know that the funeral industry was very slow to adopt cremation options because they were sad to lose conventional burial practices and all the money they were making off of them. So, but the market chose cremation. And the market can choose natural burial if we tell them. I think that's an important part of what we're doing here tonight. And on the Green Burial Council website, we have materials that are designed for you to be able to take into your communities. We have, let's see, we do webinars, so we're teaching the industry. We do webinars that are for the funeral and cemetery industry, so we're teaching them how to do this. And we have a slide deck that's for a public audience. What is natural burial? Why would we want this in our community? So if you're needing to go in front of the town planning commission to get the rules changed at the municipal cemetery, we can support that effort as well. Tell your friends and loved ones about what you've learned about natural burial. I am finding that when people attend a green burial, they are so moved by the experience of being close to the process, by the beauty of being in a natural environment. And so when folks experience that, it makes them rethink an immediate cremation. It makes them rethink if there's value in having funeral activities with the body. And I really think that we're in a movement where spreading the word is it's time for it to kind of catch and spread. And I also think it's worth telling our providers when you are making those consumer decisions around your end of life choices that their overall sustainability matters to you. If you're someone who's doing solar power and electric car, wouldn't you want your providers of your end of life needs to also be doing their utilities and their fleet that way? I think that we could all be composting at our funeral receptions using lesser impact flatware and disposable cups and all of this. So have these conversations in your area. Check out the greenburialcouncil.org for resources to help with that. On the next slide here, I have our phone number and email. We are standing by to promote these conversations in your community, across the nation, North America, etc. I see that there's numerous questions that have come into the chat. I'll scroll back up and start with those. Do you have anything before I do that, Don?
No, I think we covered all the points that I had
Yeah.
wanted to talk through.
Kathleen asked, is cremation considered green? I touched on this. Cremation has a high utility footprint in the amount, it's about a 2 to 3 hour process at a 1400-degree oven. So that's a large toll on natural gas. And also, the thing about a cremation is the whole purpose of this industrial equipment is we expose the body to that high temperature, and the other features of this equipment. The goal of it is to change your body from all the different carb-based molecules that you're already in there. Every single carbon atom that you have attached to your carbohydrates becomes converted into CO2 during the cremation process. So that's give or take 25 to 30 pounds of atmospheric CO2 from your body alone before you even talk about the emissions from burning up gas. You just have turned your body instantly into global warming greenhouse gases. So the difference with that is a natural burial or any type of burial, we're intentionally sequestering that same 25 or 30 pounds into the earth where it can't enter the environment. We also have to be careful with cremation and the environment around scattering of ashes. Ashes are, and this is true whether it's a low emissions cremation or a flame cremation, the ashes are high pH, meaning they're basic, and they're also salty. So if we scatter them in nature, that can also cause like a pollution problem locally. It's harmful to the plants where that has taken place. I see Erica asked what's necessary to open up a conservation ground, a conservation burial ground. So as you allowed, Erica, it does vary from state to state, and I'm not an expert in any state. What you need to be in alignment with, broadly speaking, is three different things. State laws around the regulation of cemeteries, who can operate them, what laws do they follow, how are they financially organized? And then specifically land use for natural burial is controlled at the county zoning level. So in the parcel of land that we're talking about, it's a question of what's the process at the county for making sure it's approved that we would be able to use this as a cemetery. And then a conservation burial ground has to go even further and be in a relationship with the nonprofit conservation group, and or have a deed restriction permanently attached to this land. So there's that's a financial question, and it's also it's a question of relationships in terms of um, what who's going to be your conservation relationship separate from the burial ground, and what's their opinion of using it for a pseudo commercial space if you consider a cemetery to be commercial. Christina asked, is a granite headstone or marker green? That can really vary, Christina, because what matters to me on that question, a rock is a rock. So then I would ask, well, how far was it delivered from? Under what condition was it mined? What was the footprint on the polishing and engraving? And was it installed with the concrete base? When we pour concrete, that emits carbon into the environment. A lot of, if you go to a cemetery, a conventional cemetery, and they show you their options for headstones, they're going to have granite in all different colors: black, red, green, white, yellowish. Uh, and all of those are sourced in different quarries around the globe and shipped all around. So that has a significant footprint as well. Here in Colorado Burial Preserve, I allow a granite headstone, but we're sourcing them from a reclaimed source. They were, decades ago, they blasted a hillside away to build a rail cart to access a mine. and we're able to reclaim and reuse those chunks of granite that were previously loosed from the earth, and we don't have to do any new mining. And that comes from right in my county, and they're engraved in my county. So we've done whatever we can to make it as green as possible. I wanted to allow people to have their name and dates on the site, but they're rough shaped. They're not polished so that they blend with the environment. In my opinion, that's as green as you could get a headstone. There's a couple of questions here around resources, and some of them are good ideas. And some of them are stuff that we already have, sort of. Like this question says, do we have a one-pager that lists all of the green choices? And we don't rank them, but we do have a website that sort of has our what you need to know about the different green options, sort of questions to ask about alkaline hydrolysis or composting, to sort of make your own decisions about how you would rank the green choices. In a second here, when I'm done in the chat, I will I'll be able to drop that link, or maybe it's something Maura could do. Um, and Taylor's asking, are there scientific publications to back up green burial? We have a PDF. It's getting a little old, but the science on it is still good. It's called The Science of Green Burial. It's something from the early days of GBC. So if you just go to Google and you type in, The Science of Green Burial PDF, that'd be a direct link to it. But you could also search for that on the GBC's website. It was written by Lee Webster, who also has, written a book to introduce green burial. And that's it's meant to be an accessible sort of resource for how you would talk to someone who's concerned about, wow, unembalmed people, doesn't that create health concerns? It's sort of calming down the most frequently asked questions about that we find in resistance to green burial. I should say that the GBC also has a science research advisory panel. This is an independent group of scientists that are working on questions for us so that we can I'm a funeral director and a volunteer. Don's a marketing expert and a volunteer. We are passionate about spreading this info out, but none of us are scientists. So we are in the process of sort of updating the professional standards of our scientific info so that we can combat some of these. We have a little bit of NIMBYism around natural burial grounds, and also a little of resistance in the conventional funeral industry.
There are a couple questions from people in your industry that are asking, how do I talk to my employer or funeral home that's more traditional on these and hasn't really wanted to consider green burial?
Give them my phone number. give me their phone number. Um, I really believe that the market conditions are what's going to force the hand. And there's two different things going on here with the conventional cemetery and funeral industry that are resistant to this. And in the early days of the Green Burial Council and the natural burial movement in the US, it was widely couched as a resistance against conventional burial. Like, wow, look how much wood and metal we waste in conventional burial. Well, funeral homes and cemeteries have a lot to lose if they stop selling you those things. But they already lost a lot when we have the growth of immediate cremation and cremation with no other services. I really see natural burial as it is an alternative to conventional burial, but it is a rich and wonderful alternative to an immediate cremation or to doing nothing at the time of someone's death. So if I still worked for a funeral home, that is where I would start my line of argument, don't you want to turn some of our direct cremation families back into funerals with services? Because these people are asking for a closer experience of the funeral, and they want to be whole body returned. They just thought that cremation was sort of simpler and greener, and it's not. So yeah, the GBC attends the National Funeral Directors Association and the ICCFA, that's the Crematory Cemetery and Funeral Association, because we are bringing this message specifically to the industry. Like, it's going to hurt you in the bottom line if you ignore this. And also, there's going to come a time when we all have to be more sustainable in all aspects of our life to keep the ocean from taking our cities. And when we all have to make cuts, this is an easy way to improve the carbon footprint of death and dying. So, but I mean it, GBC's board members would be happy to talk to some of those funeral owners directly. Okay. Samantha asked, how about Jewish or Muslim cemeteries? I mentioned that those folks have been practicing natural burial. They just call it burial. They've always been doing no embalming and biodegradable containers. Um, I like the idea, and I often recommend folks to seek out funeral homes that are experienced in Jewish and Muslim services, because they're not even going to blink about a non-religious natural burial. But the burial grounds for those groups are a little bit different. They're more likely to be only open to members of their faith. And frankly, they're more likely to be limited in what they have for spaces, because those communities have kind of carved out what's possible for themselves. So, Samantha, I love the idea of using those resources, but I would be concerned that they might rightly want to keep them to themselves. On the other hand, we're finding a lot of movement among Catholic cemeteries and being open to natural burial. Of course, Jesus was buried in a shroud. There's absolutely nothing with Christian faith that's in conflict with natural burial. But sometimes those folks too, they have the right to require that you be a member of their parish in order to use the burial ground. But other places might not ask. They might be open to all comers, and certainly that would be a good place to look for green burial friendly policies. Oh, Samantha also asked, is the GBC seeking any relationships for green burials for veterans? And I happen to know that already the National Cemetery Association is piloting green burial in the National Cemetery here in Colorado. They've started to do it at Pikes Peak National Cemetery. And I believe that they're sort of seeing how it goes, because they want, there's at least some discussion about making that available in the National Cemetery program, period. So there's a wonderful PDF. Again, you could Google it by the title. It's called Why Green Burial is a Veterans Issue. And of course, to give back to the earth is incredibly patriotic, if you feel that way about this place. Yeah, I was very happy to learn that the National Cemetery is taking natural burial seriously. And isn't that amazing? The Catholic Church and the military are ahead of corporately owned cemeteries on being open to this to these choices. So we have sort of it's a testament to how backwards the conventional players in the industry are. Christina mentioned the cemetery where she works is not open to natural burial at all, and it might be like a profit margin thing. I'm afraid that it likely is. The other thing about to give up on requiring the vault could um, uh, make grounds maintenance harder. Now, Christina, we have a webinar that's for cemeteries on how to start offering natural burial. I think that's even the title. And we say, go ahead and charge a fee. Like if you're losing your profit margin on the vault, you could charge a natural burial maintenance fee, and that's going to cover your extra work around, leveling the mound if it should settle or that kind of thing. So, bottomless vault. So that's the reason I wanted to take up this question is, a bottomless vault is saying that we want the body to still touch the earth down at the bottom of the grave, but overhead, we still want the protection of a burial vault. And a lot of cemeteries, you could also do it by taking the bottom of a vault and turning it upside down. Now it's like the top of a butter dish. Same thing. The GBC doesn't consider a bottomless vault or a butter dish vault to be green burial because of the concrete, the waste of virgin materials. There's also a cost to the family on that. They didn't want it. But some families are going to be relieved by the fact that the body was returned to the soil, that the natural processes could take place. So that's one of these sort of middle grounds. But yeah, have your employer find that video. Lisa asked about home burial. That's going to vary state by state, county by county, and in some cases, city limits or not city limits. So the National Home Funeral Alliance is a friendly organization. I'm not affiliated with them, but they've got great resources, and they keep a state by state database on a little more of a specific answer to that question. Christy, I see you're asking about promession. Is that the same as body composting? If I'll keep scrolling down if you're still out there. Perfect, Dawn. Thank you for dropping that link about how to become GBC certified. Julie asked, does chemo or any other medication in bodies create an issue? No, most cemeteries will not have any policies to say that a person can't be buried because of their medical conditions. The only exception to that might possibly be prion disease. But chemo, radiation, medical metal, not the metal, but as for the chemical questions, soil, earth does an incredible job at filtering, right? That's why we put activated carbon in our water filters, because it has this natural ability to bind and filter materials. So firstly, those types of pharmaceuticals are volatile. They're not long lasting out and in natural temperature swings and natural conditions there with water and all of this. And secondly, we find that they don't travel far from where the body is located. They're going to break down before they add any other problems. And as it regards to medical metal, it's not really, a shoulder replacement stint in the body. It's not feasible or cost effective to have those removed from a person after death. Haven't they been through enough already? For my, at the burial ground where I'm in charge of the policies, we sort of know that the best we can ever do is 99.9% biodegradable. And if we happen to leave somebody's titanium knee in the earth, we ask her forgiveness, and we know that it'll be the last thing remaining, and it too is of the earth at one time or another. Kim asks about groundwater runoff specific to cemeteries. We don't have a study specific to a natural burial ground, but as I said, we're working now with a science panel to try and, that's something where we would need an outside partner kind of funding that research and also doing it neutrally, because we have a vested interest. We can't peer review something like that. But I agree with you, Kim. This is an area that's worth looking into because it bolsters our claim, or it will bolster our claim that these are beneficial practices for the land where it's taking place. I see. Promession is freeze drying. The Green Burial Council, as I mentioned, we have a website where we're sort of talking about the other environmentally friendly dispositions. It sounds like we probably need to add promession onto kind of things to think about, questions to ask. But our focus is very tight to full body natural return in, burial, earth burial. As I mentioned earlier in the talk, I think that to perform a process on the body is always less green than to allow nature to take its course. So certainly as we talk about providing death care service to the urban masses and places where earth burial is very limited by geography, we need to look at reduced footprint solutions. And I think we're going to end up in our culture to have a constellation of options to tackle these problems. But GBC specifically is promoting the original solution, which will be full body natural return. I want to thank you all for staying through the discussion. I know we always have a lot of questions on these topics, so if I've missed anyone, I'll scroll back to the bottom. You can type your question again. And if you need more, you can email us at that info that's on the screen. As I said, we love to work with the public and with the providers in your area to try to improve the availability of these options. Oh, Lucy said any books on green burial. There have been many. I'm not going to have the newest ones off the tip of my head, but I want to say that we have a page about this. And if we don't, we're going to get it on our social media. And we're also going to have a webinar about it because I think that would be a great topic for future call on we do these public webinars about quarterly for everyone in the for people who are curious about the industry, and I think a book review one, we could even get the authors on. We're friendly with most of them. Christy, I'd be happy to connect with you after the fact. You can also do, if you email the info one, they'll forward that one to me. Well, it's been great to have you all on that night. I want to especially thank Don for joining me and all of your participation tonight. This webinar has been recorded, so we will get that posted to YouTube, and then we'll be sending out the link to that to everyone who was registered for the webinar. With that, we'll stop the recording and sign off. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.